Kelly Murashige, welcome to Writers in Relationship.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to meet you. I was saying before we hit the tape that I totally fell in love with your story when it came in. I was so excited. Also, there's a story written in second person is always exciting for me, and you pulled it off so incredibly well with the tattoos. Anyway, we'll get into that. But also just a note for listeners, this is a co-production with Hodgepodge Literature and Arts Substack and Writers in Relationship. Um, How did you find out about the magazine?
Well, I was really getting into flash fiction because I was originally more of a novelist. I feel weird calling myself that, but I generally write longer pieces and then I started getting into short stories and then I started getting shorter and shorter. And then so I was really interested in flash fiction, wanted to read more of it and, find places where maybe I could start submitting. And I think I just came across it online somehow. I would like to think it's, fate or something. Um, but I did come across it and I just saw the visuals that you had included. And they were just so striking to me, and I kind of thought originally, um, I've never really written based on images before. So I think at first I was a little bit intimidated and I thought, oh, well, I can't do that. But I kept thinking about it, and I was coming back to it and that it just really, I don't know, caught my eye. And so I wanted to write something, even if I wasn't really sure where it was going to go.
And so, like, how did you overcome? Because that's a really common thing where we feel I'm actually writing a piece and I'm trying to write comedy, and I feel like, oh, I'm never going to be able to pull it off. How did you bridge that gap between, oh, I'm not sure I can do it, and I'm excited and I want to try?
I think I've learned that every time I think I know what I'm doing, it turns out I don't. And, I think I know what I want, and then I go in a totally different direction. And in this case, I actually had a story that I had kind of worked on, and it just, something wasn't quite right about it. And then when I saw that image, the second image, it had this tiger, and it was, just a very striking image. And I kept thinking, okay, well, what if this tattoo that I had been trying to write about, it wasn't this thing, it was a tiger. And then how does that recontextualize everything else in that story? So I think it was just um, that I did want to try something different, that I thought about the story in a different way, and that I just kept coming back to it. It was just nagging at me until I was like, okay, I'll just try it and see what happens.
It's almost like we get a little possessed, almost a little like,
Yes, that's a really good way of putting it.
yeah. There's something about the influence between the external and the internal, and that back and forth where the externals can pull us out of our reluctance or insecurities sometimes.
Definitely. And I don't know, it's just so it felt like everything kind of lined up really well.
Tell us a little. You're a published, you are a published novelist. Own that. Like, that's exciting. Tell us a little bit about your evolution as a writer and your relationship to writing.
Mm, Well, I've always really liked writing. I think back to kindergarten, when I would take printer paper and just fold it and then staple it together, and that would be, and then I'd write a book, and I've always really liked writing all throughout my life. And I think in high school, I started getting a lot more serious about it. I still wasn't, I mean, honestly, I wasn't good, but I really, really wanted to publish books and see them out in the world. Um, and so I tried to get published for a very long time. It was a very, very long process. I'm going to be visiting my college soon and talking about like my how I ended up getting published, and just when I was making my presentation, I was thinking, this is such a long process, you know? Um, and, but I did end up getting published because honestly, a lot of people took a chance on me, which is something that, I don't think I'll ever get over. Even it's just, if somebody reads your work, that feels like somebody really taking a chance on you. And so that's why it's, but I think the only thing is that publishing can be very slow sometimes. And in the meantime, between writing novels, I started thinking, oh, well, I actually had a lot of short stories that I had written in high school and in college. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I could get back to that. And a publishing professional actually mentioned it, would you like to, maybe you could write short stories in the meantime. And so that was another one of those things where I thought, oh, I probably can't do that. And then it that also kind of came back to me and I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I should and maybe I should try it. And now I'm totally back in love with short stories.
It's very exciting. Um, Tell us a little bit about like the publishing experience is often abrasive for writers and artists because it's we're not used to the business element of it. And I'm just wondering, this wasn't on the list of questions, but just as it came up, can you tell us a little bit about your I hate this word, but your publishing journey, like what it's been like for you to be in that world?
Mm. Sure. I think it was kind of difficult at first because, it took me a while to get an agent. And then once I got an agent, then I was like, yay. And then it turns out there's so much more to that. Because then your literary agent who represents you and your work and really helps you fine tune it before sending it out to editors at publishing houses. And then once that happens, then it's more waiting, and it's more, oh, we like this, but it's not really right for us. So um, there was a lot of waiting there. And then when I did kind of get a yes from my publisher, then I felt really, really supported. And it was a really wonderful experience because I was so new to the entire process, but they really took everything that I thought or felt into consideration. Um, and that was something that I really wasn't expecting. So I think even though it took a very, very, very long time and a lot of no's and a lot of just, silence, that was pretty unbearable. Um, when I did get a yes, then it was just such wonderful experience. I feel like I couldn't have asked for a better one.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. So it wasn't, it was very, it was a humanizing experience.
Yes, definitely. I even got to, give input on we went through a title change before the official book announcement. And we then, when we started thinking about what the book cover would look like, I got to give input on that, which is not something that everybody gets to do. And it wasn't just, oh, a little bit of input. It was, you know, the color of the book and the font of the book and even what the main character was wearing, things like that. And that isn't necessarily a normal experience. So I was really blown away, I think.
It's fantastic. I'm really happy for you that that's how it went down.
Thank you.
It's great. Um, so my podcast is about the intersection of writing and relationships, and I'm curious if there's a relationship in your life, and it doesn't have to be to a person, but to anything, a relationship that's very alive that impacts your writing, and what that relationship is and how it impacts your writing.
I'm kind of notorious for bringing my parents and my family into almost everything even though I am a legal adult, I don't often feel like it. And especially I think, when I was just talking about the covers of my first book, and I wasn't really allowed to talk about all that with everybody, but when I got the covers, I basically ran out and I was like, Mom, Dad, come look at these covers. Help me decide, does this font look good? Does my name look weird in this? Do you think this blue is nicer than this blue? And they were really supportive all throughout. They've been, and especially like my mom has basically read everything I've ever written, so that's the kind of relationship that I really, really treasure.
And did you, when you were younger and you were writing, did you share your work with your parents from a younger age?
I think so. I think it was always kind of, um, they were always really supportive of it, even though all little kids, I mean, I also thought that I would be a ballerina or like, all these, I wanted to be this and this. But when I said I wanted to write, they really supported me. So I'm really, really lucky.
Fantastic. I mean, a lot of the conversations I have with writers, including clients, but the need for support is really, really strong because a lot of what we do is solo. We're on our own.
Right.
So to have that kind of support is really precious and important. Um, so you've gone through several processes with your books with editors, and I'm assuming with some of the short stories too. I'm very curious from the writer, because I'm a writer and an editor. What do you think makes a good relationship with an editor such that that editor is helping you make your best work? Like, how could you, if you had to describe that sort of ideal relationship with an editor, how that person acts, like, what would that look like?
I think it's a lot of open communication, and it's kind of a balance, I think, of really trying to fine tune something without ever making it. Because I think one thing that um, both my agents and my editors have said is, we want this to be your story, but basically like the best version of your story. And I feel like it's getting to the heart of what a writer wants to say. Um, and one thing that is probably important for both sides is not always reacting immediately, because maybe you'll take a look at something as an editor and you'll think, okay, well, I don't like that. But then you're not going to say it like that. To a writer, you might want to be like, I don't know if this is exactly what you're trying to say. Like, I would like some clarity here, or, something like that. And then as the writer, if you get, or maybe it's just me, but if you get any kind of feedback, then you're like, okay, well, I have to respond to this immediately, and maybe this means that my work isn't good, or I remember when I got my first edit letter, even though my editor and my team, they were all so supportive. At the same time, it felt so big, and I was like, where do I even begin with this? And it just looking at it, I was like, am I going to cry? But it's just really pacing yourself and, clarifying, maybe talking with each other, making it a conversation as opposed to just this is what you need to do. And then, okay, well, this is what I'm being forced to do. So it's just a lot of collaboration.
This is great. I think you've said some really important things. I think the pacing, that's something I don't, no one has talked about that. And I think that it's something that I can also talk to when I work with a writer to say, pace yourself. I'm editing a memoir, and it's difficult when you get your editorial letter and you see 2,000 inline comments in your manuscript. Like, how can you not be overwhelmed and want to cry? Like, that's just the normal human thing. No matter how supportive and encouraging the person is, it's just a lot of work. And like you're saying, to take the time to absorb and integrate is going to help everybody. It's going to help you, decide, does this make sense to me or not, or whatever. And then this idea of it being a conversation, I like that a lot. Yeah, it's really important because it is a collaborative thing. The editor's trying to help the writer make their best work. Tell us a little bit about Temporary Animals, which is your story in Hodgepodge issue 5.1, and the it's an interesting story. It's an interesting point of view. and I don't know if you could talk about that main character's relationship or relationships in the story, because she's talking about her ex, I believe it is. Like that's, I don't know, that was interesting to me. And also maybe how you decided on second person for that.
Mhm. For second person, I think um, it was always written in second person. It was just something that I kind of like experimenting with every once in a while. And something I've noticed is that a lot of the time, I almost feel like using you is more personal than using I, because it's putting you into this character's shoes, and it's really making me feel like I don't know, when I read second person, sometimes I think, this is like me, or, I think there's kind of a different connection when you write in second person. And in terms of the idea itself, it's based on, these temporary tattoos, which I actually found I was looking for small shops online because it was around Christmas, I think, and I wanted to support small businesses, and then I came across this shop that actually sold little animal tattoos, and so I decided to get some for a friend, and um when I was thinking about it, I just remembered how I used to love those tattoos, and I hadn't seen anybody wearing them in like 15 years or something. Nobody really does that anymore, at least where I am. And I just remembered, loving how much I just loved, being able to put it on and then peeling away the wet paper towel and then being like, oh, look at it. And then, not wanting anybody to touch it and being like, oh, well, I want to save it for as long as I can. And I just really liked that idea. And so um, that's when I started writing that story and really thinking about. But it was, like I said earlier, it was actually a totally different animal. And I think that's part of why it didn't really work, is because I just put an animal that I personally, liked and that I wanted to. It was an owl. And but something about that just didn't really fit, I think. And so it wasn't until I thought, oh, a tiger, and how I'm actually born in the year of the tiger. So I was thinking, there are all these, at least in Japanese and Chinese culture, there are all these like beliefs about what you are based on what year you were born in. It's kind of like, Pisces, Aquarius, that kind of thing. And tigers are supposed to be very stubborn, and you're very loud, and you know what you want and all these kinds of things. And I remember being a child and thinking, that's not really me, and um, maybe stubborn, but nothing else really. And so um, I just kind of thought, oh, well, what if it's a tiger? And what if that somehow ties back into this relationship with somebody she used to be with? And so that's kind of how the story got formed.
There was a line in early in the story that was so funny, where it was a child at the party asks, what's your sign? And then it was very funny. He said, well, now I'm a person who argues with children. It was very, very funny. No, it's great. Kelly, I'm also realizing I forgot to ask you, where are you, and what's your relationship with your setting, where you are. That was supposed to be a first one of my first questions, and I dropped it. But it's interesting because you're not from. Tell us where you're from and a bit about that.
So I was born and raised in Hawaii. So I'm on the main island, the biggest, or not the biggest one, that's not true. The most populous one is what I was trying to say. And I I spent almost all my life here, aside from maybe 1 year where I was in California, and learned that even though it was California, I thought it was too cold. Which, to anybody anywhere else, they know that it's not cold. But here, it's like it drops to 70 degrees, and I'm like, where's my sweater? But so it's really different here. And I feel very fortunate to have spent so much time here. It's completely sunny today, and I just feel like I, more specifically, I'm in an apartment, in a room, in my room, and this is where I've done almost all my writing, probably, hunched over, like, um, and I just, I really am a homebody, and I think that was never really more clear to me than when I left home. Um, but I guess it's kind of like, I don't want to get, all like overly metaphorical here, but I do kind of feel like, I started out in short stories when I was younger, and then I started writing books, and then I kind of came back to short stories. And that's kind of how I feel about place too, that I had to kind of venture away for a while to remember the things that I loved about where I started.
It's really lovely. Does the landscape of where you are ever come into your writing in any way?
I think it does. And I think, um, I do have some pieces that are specifically set in Hawaii, but for a long time, I was kind of afraid to have more of a sense of place just because I didn't, I think in my head, I didn't want to, alienate people because what if, I write so specifically about a place and then it makes people feel like, well, I don't understand that. Um, but, I think the landscape and kind of my thinking have changed over the years, and that's something that I'm glad has changed.
Lovely. Do you have a website? You do, don't you?
I do. It's just my name because, it is a pretty rare name. And then .com. So,
Yeah, and I'll publish that in the liner notes for the episode.
no, thank you.
Yeah, if we want to buy your books or see more of your stories, we can find them on your site.
Thank you.
Awesome. Just before we go, if you had one piece of advice to give other writers who are listening, what would that be?
I mean, I think I've kind of touched on this, but it would just be, don't be afraid to change your mind and experiment. You really never know what's going to happen. Um, and I do kind of talk about this, and like, I'm sorry, my brain is completely on this presentation I'm supposed to be giving. Um, and I talk about, how when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was going to go into maybe creative nonfiction. And then I totally changed and went, okay, well, no, it's fiction. And then I was going to do this many short stories. And then it became, oh, no, these short stories. And then, I wrote books, and then I was writing all these books. And then I was like, what if I go back to short stories? And then even here, with this particular story, it was, oh, well, I really like this publication and I love that these images, and then no, I can't do that. And then I just, so I think it's it's totally okay to change your mind. And I think the great thing about Hodgepodge and the editors and everybody is that you are in such a supportive environment. And so it's kind of like there is no better time for you to experiment because you're getting that support. And that's something that I'm really thankful for. And sorry, I'm rambling, but even here with you, I feel like, I mentioned that I'm a very awkward and nervous person, but you've been so supportive that I feel like now is a really good time to kind of step out of my comfort zone because it's with somebody who I trust. So
Oh, that's very, very kind. We as our team, we put a lot of emphasis on relationships and community and treating people really well and uplifting each other. So it really means a lot that that's been your experience, and I appreciate the feedback. But thank you. I know you're busy, and I so appreciate that you took the time to be with us today. And we'll all I'm excited to read your first YA novel, and I'm sure once I read that one, I'm gonna want to read the other ones too. So thank you very much, Kelly.
thank you.